The bullet that killed Grace's husband came through their cabin window on a Tuesday morning in March of 1878, and it took him so fast that he never even got to finish telling her he loved her back. Grace Caldwell stood in the doorway of her modest homestead outside Red River, New Mexico territory, watching the last of the neighbor women drive away in their wagon, their sympathetic faces already fading from her memory like chalk washed away by rain. Her daughter Emma, only 7 years old, clung to her skirts with small fists, and Grace placed a trembling hand on the child's head, wondering how in God's name she was going to keep them both alive on this unforgiving land. The homestead was small, just 40 acres that Thomas had claimed 3 years ago when they first arrived from Missouri with dreams bigger than their means. He had been a good man, honest and hardworking, but the land had been difficult even with him alive. Now, with winter barely behind them and spring planting season upon her, Grace stood staring at the fields that needed tending, the fence posts that needed mending, the livestock that needed feeding, and felt the weight of impossibility settle on her shoulders like a yoke meant for an ox. Emma tugged at her mother's dark blue dress. "Mama, I am hungry." Grace looked down at her daughter's upturned face, those wide brown eyes so like Thomas's, and felt something harden in her chest. Not her heart, never her heart toward this child, but something else. A determination. A refusal to let the wilderness and circumstance grind them into dust. "Come on, sweetheart, let us see what we can put together for supper." The pantry was sparse. Grace had flour enough for another week if she was careful, some beans, a little salt pork, and the chickens were still laying, thank the Lord. But supplies cost money, and money came from crops or livestock, and she had neither the knowledge nor the strength to manage what Thomas had barely managed himself. She had helped where she could during their marriage, but there was a vast difference between helping a man run a homestead and running it entirely alone. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in the small bed they now shared, Grace sat at the rough-hewn table by candlelight and went through Thomas's papers. There were debts she had not known about, loans taken out with the mercantile in town, money owed to the man who had sold them their plow. The numbers swam before her eyes until they became meaningless, but their sum was clear enough. Without a miracle, they would lose everything by summer's end. She must have dozed off at the table because the sound of horses woke her just after dawn. Grace jerked upright, her neck stiff, and peered through the window to see 3 riders approaching. Her heart hammered in her chest. Out here, unexpected visitors could mean anything and not much of it good. She reached for Thomas's rifle above the door, checked that it was loaded, and waited. The man who dismounted first was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair showing gray at the temples beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, and when he removed his hat and called out, his voice was respectful. "Mrs. Caldwell." "Name is Yates Bennett. I own the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of here. Might I have a word?" Grace cracked the door open, keeping the rifle visible but not aimed. "Mr. Bennett, what brings you to my door so early?" Yates Bennett had a weathered face that spoke of years under the New Mexico sun, but his eyes were a striking blue-green, and they held nothing but kindness as he gestured to his 2 ranch hands to stay back. "I heard about your husband, madam. I am sorry for your loss. Thomas was a good man. Bought a horse from me last year and paid fair." "Thank you," Grace said stiffly. She was not sure where this was leading, but she knew better than to trust easily. The West was full of men who would take advantage of a woman alone. "I will get straight to it, Mrs. Caldwell. I know you are in a hard spot. A homestead is more than one person can handle alone, especially with a child to care for. I came to make you an offer." He held up a hand as she stiffened. "Not the kind you are thinking. An honest offer of employment." Grace studied him through the narrow opening of the door. "What kind of employment? My ranch is sizable, but my house is a mess. I have been a widower for 3 years now, and I have been living like a bachelor, which is to say poorly. I could use someone to help manage the household, do some cooking and cleaning. In return, I would pay you a fair wage, provide room and board for you and your daughter, and you would not have to worry about losing this place. I could have my men keep it up until you decide what you want to do with it." It was too generous. Grace's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Yates Bennett met her gaze steadily. "Because I remember what it was like when my wife died and I had help. My neighbors rallied around me, made sure my ranch did not fall apart while I was grieving. I have been fortunate, Mrs. Caldwell. My ranch does well. I can afford to help someone who needs it, and truth be told, I do need the help. The house is in a sorry state." "Mama." Emma's small voice came from behind her. "Who is it?" Grace glanced back at her daughter, then at Yates Bennett. She did not want to accept charity, but was it charity if she was working for it? And what other choice did she have? She could try to manage the homestead alone and likely fail, losing everything and ending up with nothing. Or she could swallow her pride and accept help from a man who seemed, at least on the surface, to be offering it with genuine kindness. "I will need to think on it," she said finally. Yates nodded. "Of course. Take your time. I will be in town at the Mercantile tomorrow afternoon if you want to talk more, or send word out to the ranch. Anyone can tell you where the Triple Bar is." He settled his hat back on his head, nodded respectfully, and mounted his horse. Grace watched the 3 men ride away, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, what did that man want?" Grace closed the door and knelt down to her daughter's level. "He offered us work, sweetheart, a place to stay and wages." "Would we leave our house?" Grace looked around the small cabin, at the walls Thomas had built with his own hands, at the table where they had shared meals as a family, at the bed where Emma had been conceived and born. Leaving felt like betrayal, but staying might mean slow starvation or worse. "Maybe for a little while," she said softly, "just until things get easier." But she wondered if things would ever be easy again. Grace spent the day trying to work the land, but everything she touched seemed to fight her. The plow was too heavy, the horse too stubborn, and by noon she had managed only 2 crooked furrows that would have shamed a child. Her hands were blistered and bleeding, her back screamed in agony, and Emma sat on the porch watching with worried eyes that made Grace want to weep. That evening she made her decision. The next afternoon, Grace dressed herself and Emma in their Sunday best, such as it was, and drove their small wagon into Red River. The town was not much to speak of, just a main street with a mercantile, a saloon, a church, a bank, and a handful of other businesses. But it was civilization, and after days of isolation on the homestead, Grace found the bustle of people oddly comforting. She found Yates Bennett at the Mercantile, true to his word, settling an account with the proprietor. When he saw her, his face registered surprise and then something that might have been relief. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, tipping his hat. "Did you come to a decision?" Grace held Emma's hand tightly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Bennett, but I want terms clear. I work for wages, same as any employee. Room and board for me and my daughter, and my homestead stays mine. Your men can tend it, but it remains my property." "Agreed," Yates said without hesitation. $30 a month and found. That is fair wages for a housekeeper in these parts, and your homestead is yours, no question. I will have my foreman, Charlie, check on it regular, keep things from falling apart. When you are ready to go back, or if you decide to sell it, that is your choice entirely. $30 a month was more than fair. It was generous. Grace felt her suspicions rise again. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Bennett? Truly?" Yates glanced down at Emma, who was peeking at him from behind her mother's skirts, then back at Grace. His expression was earnest, open. "Can we speak plainly, Mrs. Caldwell? I would prefer it. I have been alone for 3 years. My wife, Catherine, died of fever, and I have been managing on my own since then. The ranch does well because I have good men working for me, but a ranch house is not the same as a home. I eat meals cooked by a man who thinks beans and coffee constitute fine dining. I wear shirts with missing buttons. I live in rooms covered in dust. I am not looking for a wife if that is your concern. I am looking for help, for someone to make my house livable again. And when I heard about your situation, it seemed like it might benefit us both." Grace studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. Yates Bennett had the look of a man telling the truth, and she had always prided herself on reading people well. "All right," she said finally. "When would you like us to start?" "Whenever you are ready. Today, if you want. Or take a few days to settle your affairs." "Today," Grace said. The decision, once made, brought a strange relief. "We have nothing keeping us at the homestead but memories, and those will keep." Yates smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something warmer. "Let me finish up here, and I will drive you out myself. We can send some men back for your belongings." The ride to the Triple Bar Ranch took just over an hour, and as they crested a rise and Grace saw the spread below, she felt her breath catch. This was not the modest homestead she was used to. The ranch house was substantial, a 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapped around it. There were multiple barns, a bunkhouse, corrals with dozens of horses, and cattle dotting the landscape as far as she could see. Yates Bennett was not just comfortable, he was wealthy. "How much land do you have?" Grace asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "About 1,500 acres, Yates said. "Started with 300, but I have been buying up neighboring parcels when they come available, running about 2,000 head of cattle, give or take." 2,000 head. Grace tried to imagine that much livestock and failed. Thomas had been proud of their 12 cows. Emma was staring too, her eyes wide. "Is that a real barn, Mama? It is so big." "2 barns, actually," Yates said with a chuckle. "One for horses, one for equipment and hay." "You like horses, Miss Emma?" Emma nodded shyly. "Well, we have plenty. Maybe tomorrow I can introduce you to some of the gentler ones." Grace felt a small flutter of something in her chest. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else, something she was not ready to name. Yates Bennett was being kind to her daughter, and that mattered more than all the land and cattle in the territory. The ranch house was indeed in need of a woman's touch. Yates had not exaggerated. Dust covered every surface, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and Grace suspected the floors had not been properly swept in months. But the bones of the house were good, the furniture solid if neglected, and there was space. So much space after the cramped cabin. Yates showed them to 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, both larger than the entire sleeping area of the homestead. "These were guest rooms," he said. "I sleep in the master bedroom at the end of the hall. You and Emma can each have your own room or share if you prefer." Emma's eyes went wide. "My own room, if your mother says it is all right." Grace felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. A month ago, her daughter had a father and a future. Now she was being offered her own bedroom in a stranger's house, and it felt both like charity and like salvation. "Thank you," she managed. "This is more than generous. It is just space, Mrs. Caldwell, empty space that might as well be used." Yates cleared his throat. "I will leave you two to settle in. Kitchen is downstairs. Help yourself to anything you need. I will be in the study if you need me." After he left, Grace sat on one of the beds and pulled Emma onto her lap. "Are you all right, sweetheart? I know this is all very strange." Emma nodded against her mother's chest. "Mr. Bennett seems nice." "He does," Grace agreed, "but we must remember that we are working for him. This is not our home, it is just a place we are staying for a while." "Can I still have my own room?" Despite everything, Grace laughed. "Yes, you can have your own room." That first evening, Grace cooked dinner for Yates and his foreman, Charlie, who lived in a small house near the bunkhouse but took his meals at the main house. It felt strange to be cooking in someone else's kitchen, but the pantry was well stocked, and she was able to put together a decent meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from the cold cellar. When she called the men to dinner, Yates looked at the table as if she had performed a miracle. "Mrs. Caldwell, this looks wonderful." Charlie, a leathery man of about 50 with kind eyes, nodded enthusiastically. "Smells better than anything I have had in months, and that is the truth." Emma ate quietly, still shy around the strangers, but Grace noticed Yates making gentle attempts to draw her out, asking about what she liked to do, whether she liked to read, if she had ever ridden a horse. He was good with children, Grace realized, patient and warm. After dinner, while Grace cleaned up, Yates came into the kitchen with his empty plate. "You do not have to do that tonight," he said. "You have had a long day." "I am doing what you hired me for," Grace replied, but there was no heat in it. "Grace." He stopped, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Caldwell, I want you to understand something. Yes, I hired you as a housekeeper, but I am not a tyrant. You are not a servant in the sense of being beneath me. You are an employee, and I hope in time, a friend. This house is big enough that we can all have our own space, our own lives. I just want it to be comfortable while we share it." Grace turned to look at him, her hand still in the dishwater. "You are an unusual man, Mr. Bennett." "Yates," he said. "Please, Mr. Bennett was my father. Then you should call me Grace," he smiled. "Grace it is." The days began to develop a rhythm. Grace woke early, made breakfast for the household, then spent her mornings cleaning and organizing. The house was large enough that she knew it would take weeks to get everything truly in order, but she worked steadily, room by room. Emma helped where she could, and in the afternoons, Yates or one of the ranch hands would take the girl out to see the animals or ride one of the gentle horses. Grace watched from the windows as her daughter slowly came back to life. Emma had been withdrawn since Thomas's death, quiet and sad in a way that broke Grace's heart. But here, with space to run and animals to care for and people who smiled at her, Emma was beginning to be a child again. And Grace found herself healing too in ways she had not expected. The work was hard but satisfying. There was something deeply rewarding about taking a neglected house and making it a home again. She cleaned windows until they sparkled, beat rugs until no dust remained, organized pantries and linen closets with ruthless efficiency. She cooked meals that brought genuine pleasure to the men who ate them. And slowly, the tight knot of grief and fear in her chest began to loosen. Yates was gone much of the day, working the ranch with his men, but in the evenings he would often sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, and Grace found herself joining him after Emma went to bed. They talked about small things at first. The weather, the progress of the spring calving, the state of the territory. But gradually, the conversations deepened. One evening, about 2 weeks after Grace and Emma had arrived, Yates told her about his wife. "Catherine was a school teacher from back east," he said, staring out at the sunset. "We met when she came out here to teach at the mission school. I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, all prim and proper and completely out of her element. I courted her for 6 months before she agreed to marry me." "She must have loved you very much to give up teaching," Grace said. "She did teach for a while. Started a small school right here on the ranch for the children of my workers. She loved it." His voice grew thick. "The fever came on fast. One day she was fine, the next she was burning up. 3 days later she was gone. I never even got to say a proper goodbye." Grace felt tears sting her eyes. "I am sorry. That is a terrible way to lose someone." "How did Thomas die?" Yates asked gently. "If you do not mind my asking." Grace had not talked about it with anyone, not really. The neighbor women had clucked and soothed but never asked for details. But sitting here in the gathering darkness with this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, she found the words coming. "A stray bullet through the window. We never even knew where it came from. Maybe hunters, maybe just someone being careless. It does not matter. He died in my arms trying to tell me he loved me, and I have been angry at the world ever since." Yates was quiet for a moment. "Anger is natural. Is it? Because I feel like it is consuming me. I am angry at Thomas for dying. I am angry at myself for not being able to manage the homestead alone. I am angry at God for taking Emma's father. And then I feel guilty for being angry, and it all just circles around and around. Catherine's sister told me once that grief is just love with nowhere to go," Yates said. "Maybe anger is part of that. You love Thomas, you still do. And that love is still there, but he is not, so it has to come out somehow." Grace wiped at her eyes. "That is a wise way of looking at it. I cannot take credit. Her sister was a wise woman." He paused. "It gets easier, Grace. Not better exactly. You never stop missing them, but it gets easier to carry." They sat in comfortable silence after that, and Grace felt something shift inside her. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she was not alone in her grief. Someone else understood. As spring turned to early summer, the ranch came fully alive. Calves grew strong and fat. The grass turned green and lush, and the work of running a ranch intensified. Grace saw less of Yates during the day, but their evening conversations continued, and she found herself looking forward to them with an anticipation that both pleased and worried her. She was not ready to think about another man. Thomas had been dead barely 3 months. It was too soon, too raw, too disrespectful to his memory. But she could not deny that she enjoyed Yates's company. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was patient with Emma, firm but kind with his men, and he treated Grace with a respect that she had rarely experienced. One afternoon in early June, Charlie came to the house looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Caldwell, could I have a word?" Grace wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course, Charlie." "What is it?" "It is about your homestead, madam. We have been checking on it regular like the boss said, but yesterday we found signs that someone has been there. Looks like maybe someone was poking around, seeing if the place was abandoned." Grace felt her stomach drop. "Was anything taken?" "Not that we could tell, but there is not much there to take. I just thought you should know. Might be nothing, might be someone looking to squat. Hard to say." "Thank you for telling me. Does Mr. Bennett know?" "Not yet, madam. I came straight to you." Grace found Yates in the barn, working on a broken wagon wheel. When she told him what Charlie had said, his expression darkened. "I will ride out there tomorrow, take a few men. If someone is thinking about claiming your land, we will disabuse them of that notion." "I could come with you," Grace said. "It is my property." Yates looked at her for a long moment. "It might not be safe." "It is my land, Yates. I should be there." He nodded slowly. "All right, we will leave at first light. Emma can stay here with the cook's wife. She will be safe." The ride to the homestead felt strange and sad. Grace had not been back since they left, and seeing the cabin again, so small and lonely looking, made her chest ache. But Yates was all business, checking the doors and windows, looking for signs of intrusion. "There," he said, pointing to boot prints that were clearly not from his men. "Someone has been here recently." Charlie was right. They spent an hour checking the property, and while nothing seemed to be missing or damaged, Grace felt violated somehow. This was Thomas's land, the place where they had tried to build a future. To have strangers trespassing felt like a desecration. "What do I do?" she asked Yates as they prepared to leave. "I cannot live here and protect it." "No, but I can have men ride by more frequently. And we could put out word in town that the property is still claimed and occupied. That might discourage anyone looking for easy pickings." He hesitated. "Or you could sell it, Grace. I know it has sentimental value, but if keeping it is causing you stress." "No," Grace said firmly. "Not yet. Thomas gave his life trying to make this work. I cannot just let it go." Yates nodded. "Then we will protect it. I give you my word." On the ride back, Grace found herself studying Yates as he rode beside her. He sat a horse like he was born to it, easy and natural, and the afternoon sun picked out gold highlights in his graying hair. He was handsome, she realized, though not in the way Thomas had been. Thomas had been boyish and open, always smiling. Yates was more reserved, weathered by life and loss, but there was a strength to him that Grace found deeply appealing. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Yates glanced at her. "For what?" "For caring about my homestead. For helping me protect it. You did not have to do any of this." "Of course I did," Yates said simply. "It is the right thing to do." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Grace found Yates on the porch as usual, but instead of sitting in her customary chair, she hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you really offer me this job? And please tell me the truth." Yates set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "I told you the truth. I needed help with the house and you needed work. But there must be other women who could have done this work. Why me specifically?" Yates was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want the complete truth?" "I do." "I saw you at Thomas's funeral," he said. "I was there in the back. I did not know him well, but I make it a point to pay respects when I can. And I saw you standing there with Emma, and you looked so lost and so determined at the same time. You were grieving, clearly, but you were not broken. And I thought, here is a woman who will not give up. Here is a woman who will fight for her daughter and her future. And when I heard you were struggling with the homestead, I thought maybe I could help. Maybe we could help each other." Grace felt her breath catch. "That is why you came. That, and Charlie mentioned that he heard you might lose the land. I could not stand the idea of you and Emma ending up with nothing after everything you had been through." He ran a hand through his hair. "I know it was presumptuous. I know you do not really know me, but I have been where you are, Grace. I know what it is like to feel like the ground has been pulled out from under you, and I had people who helped me. I wanted to pay that forward." Grace felt tears threatening again. "You are a good man, Yates Bennett." "I am a man who has been blessed with good fortune," Yates corrected. "And I believe we have a responsibility to help others when we can." Grace sat down in her chair, her mind whirling. She had been so focused on survival, on protecting Emma, on getting through each day, that she had not allowed herself to think beyond that. But now, sitting here with this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness, she felt something stirring in her heart. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "Emma asked me the other day if we were going to live here forever," Grace said quietly. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I did not know, that we were here for now and that was enough." Yates nodded. "And is it enough?" Grace looked out at the darkening landscape, at the ranch spread before them like a promise. "Yes," she said. "For now it is enough." But even as she said it, she wondered if she was lying to herself, because the truth was, she was beginning to want more than just enough. She was beginning to want something she had thought she would never want again. She was beginning to imagine a future. Summer came on strong, turning the New Mexico landscape golden and harsh. The heat was intense, and the work of running the ranch never stopped. Grace fell into bed exhausted every night, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest work and purposeful days. Emma thrived. She was tanned and healthy, and she had made friends with the children of some of the ranch workers. Grace watched her daughter running and playing and felt a fierce gratitude that they had landed here in this place with these people. And she watched Yates too, though she tried not to be obvious about it. She watched how he managed his men with firmness and fairness. She watched how he gentled a frightened horse with patience and skill. She watched how he looked at Emma with a softness in his eyes that made Grace's heart ache. He would have been a good father, she thought. He was a good man. One evening in mid-July, Yates came in for dinner looking troubled. Grace had made a stew that had been simmering all day, and the kitchen smelled like heaven, but he barely seemed to notice. "What is wrong?" Grace asked after Emma had gone to play. Yates sighed. "Charlie rode out to check your homestead today. The trespassers are back, and this time they left a note." Grace felt her blood run cold. What did it say? It said that abandoned property is fair game, and they are filing a claim with the land office in Santa Fe. But it is not abandoned. Grace felt panic rising in her chest. "I still own it. Thomas filed the claim properly. We have the deed." "I know. But if someone files a counterclaim saying the property is abandoned and unworked, there could be a legal battle, and those can be expensive and complicated." Grace sank into a chair. "What do I do?" Yates pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You could move back, show that the property is occupied and worked. I cannot manage it on my own. We have been through this. I know." Yates hesitated, then leaned forward. "Grace, I have a suggestion. You might not like it, but hear me out." "What is it? Marry me." Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" Yates repeated. "Not for love or romance, but as a practical arrangement. If we married, your land would become part of my holdings. I could manage it, work it, protect it. You and Emma would be secure. And Emma would have a father figure, someone to help guide her as she grows." Grace felt like the world had tilted sideways. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." Yates's blue-green eyes were steady on hers. "Grace, I have grown fond of you and Emma over these past months. I enjoy your company. I respect you. I think we could have a good life together. Maybe not the passionate romance of a first marriage, but something solid, something that works for both of us. But you said you were not looking for a wife." "I said I was not looking. But sometimes what we need finds us anyway." He reached across the table and took her hand gently. "Think about it, Grace. Emma needs a father. She deserves to grow up with a man who can teach her about the world, protect her, guide her, and you need a partner. Someone to share the burden of life with. I can be that for you. I want to be that for you." Grace pulled her hand back, her mind reeling. "This is insane. We barely know each other. We have lived under the same roof for 3 months. I know you are strong and smart and fiercely protective of your daughter. I know you have a sense of humor that catches me off guard. I know you sing when you think no one is listening, and you have nightmares sometimes that you never talk about. I know you better than you think, Grace." "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Grace asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Because from where I am sitting, it sounds like charity dressed up as marriage." Yates leaned back in his chair. "I get a partner. I get someone to share my life with. I get a daughter because I would want to adopt Emma legally if you would allow it. I get a home instead of just a house. And maybe in time I get love again. I am not saying I am in love with you now, Grace. That would be a lie, but I care about you. I admire you. And I think that is a better foundation for a marriage than a lot of people have." Grace stood up, needing to move to think. "I cannot make a decision like this right now. It is too much. I know. Take your time. But Grace, those men are not going to stop trying to take your land." and the legal system in the territory is complicated and slow. As my wife, you would have my protection and my resources. As a widow on your own, you have very little." Grace hated that he was right. She hated feeling backed into a corner. But most of all, she hated that a small part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Because the truth was, she had been falling in love with Yates Bennett for weeks now, and she had been trying desperately not to admit it. "I need time," she said, "of course." Yates stood. "I am going to check on the horses. Take all the time you need." After he left, Grace sank back into her chair and put her head in her hands. Marriage, to Yates. It was practical, sensible even. But it also felt like betraying Thomas, like giving up on the love they had shared. Was 3 months enough time to even consider another man? Was a year? Was there ever enough time? But then she thought about Emma, about the way her daughter's face lit up when Yates taught her to rope, or when he lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see over the corral fence. Emma adored him already, and Grace had to admit that having a father figure would be good for her daughter. Thomas was gone, and no amount of grieving would bring him back. Emma deserved to have a man in her life who would care for her and guide her. And what about Grace herself? What did she deserve? She had been a good wife to Thomas. She had loved him truly and mourned him deeply. Did she deserve happiness again? Did she deserve companionship and partnership and maybe even love? She thought about Yates's words. "Emma needs a father and you need a partner." He was right. She did need a partner. The past 3 months had shown her that. Life was too hard, too complicated, too full of unexpected challenges to face alone. And if she was honest with herself, she wanted Yates as that partner. She wanted his strength and his steadiness. She wanted his quiet humor and his gentle kindness. She wanted him, but admitting that felt terrifying. Grace spent a sleepless night wrestling with her decision. She got up before dawn and made coffee, then sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the ranch. The land was beautiful in the early morning light, painted in shades of gold and orange, and she felt a deep peace settle over her. Yates found her there an hour later. He looked like he had not slept much either. "Grace, I have been thinking about what you said," Grace began. "About Emma needing a father and me needing a partner." Yates sat down carefully as if afraid to spook her. "And you are right about all of it. Emma does need a father, and I do need a partner. I cannot do this alone, and I am tired of trying to." She took a deep breath. "But I need you to understand something. If I say yes to this, I want it to be a real marriage. Not just a legal arrangement. I want a husband, Yates. I want companionship and partnership, and eventually, when I am ready, I want love. Can you offer me that?" Yates's face transformed, hope lighting his eyes. "Yes. God, yes, Grace. I want all of that too. I want a real marriage with you. I want to build a life together, build a family. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want all of it." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am not saying I am in love with you yet. I am not ready for that, but I think I could be in time. I think I am already halfway there." Yates reached out and took her hands. "That is more than enough for me. We will take this as slow as you need. I am not going anywhere." "Then yes," Grace whispered. "I will marry you." Yates pulled her into his arms, and Grace let herself be held, let herself feel safe and protected for the first time in months. It was not the wild, passionate love she had felt for Thomas. It was something quieter, steadier, but it felt right. It felt like coming home. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Red River. Emma stood beside Grace in a new dress that Yates had bought for the occasion, and Charlie stood up as Yates's best man. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but when Yates kissed Grace at the end, she felt something shift inside her. This was real. This was her new life. The wedding night was awkward at first. Grace had not been with anyone but Thomas, and the thought of sharing a bed with another man felt strange and uncomfortable. But Yates was patient and gentle, giving her space to adjust, to come to him in her own time. "We do not have to do anything tonight," he said softly as they stood in the bedroom that was now theirs. "We can just sleep. We have all the time in the world." But Grace found herself not wanting to wait. She wanted to move forward, to embrace this new life she had chosen. "No," she said. "I want this. I want you." Yates kissed her then, slowly and thoroughly, and Grace felt herself responding despite her nerves. He was different from Thomas in the way he touched her, more deliberate, more experienced. But it was not a bad different. It was just different, and she let herself sink into it, let herself feel pleasure again after so many months of grief. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with Yates's arm around her, Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were not sad tears. They were tears of release, of letting go of the past and embracing the future. She was not betraying Thomas by loving again. She was honoring him by living fully, by giving Emma the family she deserved, by choosing happiness when it was offered. "Are you all right?" Yates whispered. "Yes," Grace said. "I really am." The summer stretched on, and Grace slowly grew into her new role as Yates's wife. She took over management of the household completely, hired a girl from town to help with the heavy cleaning, and began making the ranch house truly her own. She hung curtains in the windows, planted flowers around the porch, and organized the study that had been Yates's domain. Emma adjusted to having Yates as a stepfather with surprising ease. She started calling him Papa about a month after the wedding, and Yates's face when he heard it for the first time made Grace fall a little more in love with him. He was good with Emma, patient and playful, and he began teaching her to read better and work with numbers. "She is bright," Yates told Grace one evening. "We should think about getting her a proper education, maybe send her to school in Santa Fe when she is older." Grace felt a pang at the thought of Emma leaving, but she knew he was right. "She deserves every opportunity we can give her." "She is our daughter now," Yates said, "and I want her to have the best life possible." In August, Yates formally adopted Emma, and they celebrated with a small party at the ranch. Emma was thrilled, showing everyone her new name written on the adoption papers. Emma Bennett. She traced the letters over and over with her finger, and Grace had to excuse herself to cry happy tears in the kitchen. The issue with the homestead resolved itself when Yates sent his lawyer to Santa Fe to deal with the counterclaim. The men who had been trying to squat were discouraged by the appearance of legal representation and withdrew their claim. Yates arranged to have the land worked by some of his men, planting it with hay that would feed his cattle through the winter. "It is still yours," he assured Grace. "I am just managing it. If you ever want to go back, we will make it work." But Grace found she had no desire to return to the homestead. Her life was here now, with Yates and Emma on this thriving ranch that felt more like home every day. As summer turned to fall, Grace realized she had fallen completely in love with her husband. It had happened gradually, so slowly she had not noticed it until one day she looked at him across the dinner table and felt her heart swell with affection and desire and deep, abiding love. This was different from what she had felt for Thomas, but it was no less real, no less powerful. That night she told him. They were in bed, and Grace turned to Yates in the darkness and said, "I love you." She felt him go still. "Grace, I love you," she repeated. "I did not think I would ever love anyone again after Thomas, but I do. I love you, Yates Bennett. I love your kindness and your strength. I love how you are with Emma. I love how you make me laugh. I love how safe I feel with you. I just love you." Yates pulled her close, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since the first time I saw you at Thomas's funeral, standing there so brave and so broken. I have been falling more in love with you every day since." They made love then, and it was different from before. There was passion, yes, but also tenderness and joy and a sense of rightness that made Grace's heart sing. This was her husband. This was her partner. This was her love. Fall turned to winter, and the ranch settled into the slower rhythms of the cold months. Grace discovered she was pregnant just after Christmas, and the news filled the household with joy. Emma was ecstatic at the thought of a baby brother or sister, and Yates looked like he might burst with happiness. "I never thought I would have this again," he told Grace, his hand on her still flat stomach. "A wife I love, a daughter, and now another child. I feel blessed beyond measure." Grace felt the same. A year ago, she had been drowning in grief and fear, certain that her life was over. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, her daughter was thriving, and she was carrying a new life. The future stretched before her bright and full of promise. The winter was hard, as winters in New Mexico could be, but the ranch house was warm and comfortable. Grace spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and organizing the nursery that had once been a storage room. Emma helped, chattering excitedly about all the things she would teach the baby. Yates was attentive and protective, insisting Grace rest more and work less. "You are growing a human," he said. "That is work enough." The baby was born in early May, a son they named Thomas Yates Bennett. Grace cried when she held him for the first time, mourning the man who would never meet this child but grateful that his name would live on. Yates held her as she cried, understanding without words what she was feeling. Emma was a devoted big sister, always wanting to help with the baby. She would sit for hours just watching him sleep, and Grace's heart swelled with love for both her children. As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates expanded his herd, bought more land, and the Triple Bar became known throughout the territory as one of the finest operations around. But he never let the work consume him. He always made time for his family, for dinners together and evenings on the porch and Sunday picnics by the river. Grace thrived as well. She had found her place, her purpose. She managed the household with skill, raised her children with love, and supported her husband in his work. She took on the role of hostess when Yates had business associates visit, and she became known in the territory as a gracious and intelligent woman. She also began teaching some of the ranch workers' children to read and write, carrying on Catherine's legacy without even realizing it at first. When Emma turned 12, she asked if she could learn to really work the ranch. "I want to know how to do what Papa does," she said. "I want to learn the business." Yates was surprised but pleased. "It is not typical for girls to learn ranching," he said. "But there is no reason you cannot if you want to." So Emma became Yates's shadow, learning about cattle and horses, about land management and markets. She had a natural aptitude for it, and by the time she was 15, she could ride and rope as well as any of the hands. Grace worried sometimes that her daughter was missing out on more traditional feminine pursuits, but Emma seemed happy, and that was what mattered most. Thomas proved to be a bright, energetic boy who adored his big sister and followed her everywhere when he was allowed. Yates taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and the boy took to horses like a duck to water. Grace watched her husband with their son and felt her love deepen even further. Yates was an excellent father, firm but fair, loving but not indulgent. 2 years after Thomas was born, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she was often tired and sick. Yates hired more help for the house and insisted Grace rest as much as possible. The baby, another boy they named Jack, arrived healthy and squalling in February. With 3 children, the house was truly full. There was noise and laughter and occasional tears, but it was the sound of life, of family, and Grace would not have traded it for anything. She thought sometimes about that desperate widow who had stood in the doorway of a failing homestead, wondering how she would survive. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. Emma grew into a beautiful and capable young woman who had no interest in leaving the ranch. "This is my home," she told Grace when she was 18. "Why would I want to go anywhere else?" Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's easy way with horses and his mother's quick mind. Jack was the wild one, always getting into mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. Grace and Yates grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered challenges together, droughts and cattle diseases, the occasional difficult employee, and the normal struggles of raising children. But through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense, supporting each other, loving each other, building a life that was richer than either had imagined possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Grace back to her old homestead. She had not been there in years, and she was surprised to see that it was maintained and even improved. The cabin had been repaired and expanded, and the fields were productive. "I have been leasing it to a young family," Yates explained. "The husband is a good worker and his wife reminds me of you. They needed a chance, so I gave them one." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "You are a good man, Yates Bennett." "I learned from the best," he said, pulling her close. "You taught me that love is not just passion and romance. It is partnership and respect. It is choosing each other every day. It is building something together that is bigger than either of you alone." Grace kissed him, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into it. "I was so lost when you found me," she whispered. "I thought my life was over. And now I know it was just beginning." They stood there for a long time, holding each other on the land where Grace's first love had died and her new love had been born. It felt right, full circle somehow. Thomas would always be part of her story, the father of her first child, the man who had brought her to New Mexico. But Yates was her future, her partner, the love of her second chance at life. As they rode back to the ranch, Grace thought about everything that had happened since that day Yates had appeared at her door with his surprising offer. She thought about how scared she had been, how desperate. She thought about the courage it had taken to accept his help, to open herself to the possibility of love again. She thought about Emma calling Yates Papa for the first time, about holding baby Thomas in her arms, about all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that had made up their life together. And she felt grateful. Grateful for the second chance. Grateful for the love. Grateful for the family they had built together. That evening, with all 3 children gathered around the dinner table, Emma talking excitedly about a new foal, Thomas arguing with Jack about something inconsequential, Grace looked at Yates across the table and smiled. He smiled back, and in that smile was everything. Love, partnership, gratitude, and the promise of all the years still to come. After dinner, as was their habit, Grace and Yates sat on the porch together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the ranch stretched out before them, peaceful and prosperous. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Taking in a desperate widow and her daughter," Yates laughed. "Never, not for a single moment." "You are the best decision I ever made, Grace Bennett. Even though I was a charity case. You were never a charity case. You were a woman who needed help, and I was a man who could provide it. But what we built together, that is not charity. That is love. That is family." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor through all the storms of life. "Emma really does need a father," she said softly. "And I really did need a partner. You were right about that from the beginning. We all need each other, Yates corrected. That is what family is, not just blood but choice, choosing each other every day. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Grace felt a peace so profound it almost hurt. She had lost so much when Thomas died. But she had found so much more than she ever dreamed possible. She had found love again, deep and true and lasting. She had found a partner who stood beside her through everything. She had found a father for her daughter and babies who would carry their love forward into the future. She had found home. Years continued to pass, and the Bennett family became a fixture in Red River and the surrounding territory. Yates expanded the ranch even further, making it one of the largest operations in New Mexico. But he never lost sight of what mattered most. Family always came first. Emma eventually married one of the neighboring rancher's sons, a good man who loved the land as much as she did. They built a house on the far end of the Triple Bar property, and Emma continued to work alongside her father, learning the business inside and out. When she gave Grace and Yates their first grandchild, a daughter they named Catherine Grace, Grace cried tears of joy. Thomas grew into a skilled horseman and took over much of the day-to-day management of the ranch, giving Yates more time to focus on the business side of things. He was steady and responsible, with Yates's calm demeanor and Grace's quick thinking. Jack, true to his wild nature, eventually left the ranch to explore the changing West. He sent letters from California and Oregon, full of adventures and promises to return. And he did return eventually, with a wife and stories that kept the family entertained for weeks. As Grace entered her 50s, she looked back on her life with wonder. She had lived 2 lifetimes in a way. The first with Thomas, brief but intense and formative. The second with Yates, longer and deeper and richer for all the years and experiences they had shared. Both were part of who she was, both had shaped her, and she was grateful for both. Yates grew gray and a little slower, but he was still strong, still vital, still the man who had appeared at her door all those years ago with an offer that had changed her life. They still sat on the porch together every evening, still talked about everything and nothing, still held hands like young lovers. One evening, as they watched the sunset in their customary spot, Yates said, "I have been thinking about that day I rode out to your homestead. Do you remember?" "Every detail," Grace said. "You scared me half to death." "I was so nervous," Yates admitted. "I had practiced what I was going to say for days, and then when I got there and saw you with that rifle, looking fierce and terrified at the same time, I almost lost my nerve." "Why did not you?" "Because I could see the fight in you. I could see that you were not going to give up without trying everything, and I wanted to be part of that fight. I wanted to help you win." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made. You said that before. It bears repeating." Grace leaned against him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and something indefinably Yates. "Do you think Thomas would have approved of us?" It was a question she had asked before, but Yates never seemed to mind answering. "I think he would have wanted you to be happy. I think he would have wanted Emma to have a father. I think he would have been grateful that someone was taking care of his family." "I think so too," Grace said softly. "I loved him, Yates. I still do in a way. I know. And that is all right. Love does not diminish because we find more of it. Your heart is big enough for all of us." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars emerged. 3 grandchildren were asleep in the house behind them. Their grown children were scattered but near, building their own lives while remaining part of the larger family. The ranch was thriving, the land was productive, and the future looked bright. Grace thought about the desperate widow she had been, standing in that small cabin doorway, wondering how she would survive the next day. much less the next year. She thought about the courage it had taken to accept help from a stranger, to open her heart again when it was still bleeding from loss. She thought about all the small decisions and moments that had led her here, to this porch, with this man, surrounded by the family they had built together. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For seeing Emma, for offering us a chance when we were desperate. For being patient with me when I was grieving. For loving me even when I did not think I could love again. For being the father Emma needed and the partner I needed. For all of it." Yates turned to her, his blue-green eyes soft in the starlight. "Grace Caldwell Bennett, you are the great love of my life. Marrying you was not charity or kindness. It was the most selfish thing I ever did because I could not imagine my life without you in it. You and Emma brought light back into this house, into my life. You gave me purpose beyond the ranch. You gave me a family. You gave me love. I am the one who should be thanking you." Grace kissed him then, long and slow and full of all the love she felt for this man who had saved her and who she had saved in return. Because that was what love was, she had learned. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to walk through life together, supporting each other, lifting each other up, building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. The seasons continued to turn, and Grace and Yates grew old together. They celebrated 20 years of marriage, then 25, then 30. They welcomed more grandchildren and then great-grandchildren. The ranch passed gradually into Thomas's capable hands, with Emma as a full partner in the business. Grace's hair turned white, and her hands grew gnarled with age, but Yates still held them every evening on the porch. His back grew stiff, and his step slowed, but he still smiled at her the way he had on their wedding day. They had built something together that would outlast them. Not just the ranch, though that would endure, but a family. A legacy of love and partnership and choosing each other every day. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the lessons they had learned, about resilience and courage, about opening your heart even when it is scared, about the power of love to heal and transform. On their 40th anniversary, the family gathered for a celebration. Emma and her husband, Thomas and his wife, Jack and his family, all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, and Grace stood in the doorway watching it all, marveling at how much life could change in 40 years. Yates came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Grace said. "That first day you came to the homestead, how scared I was, how lost, how I almost said no to your offer because I was too proud and too afraid. But you did not say no." "No, I did not. And look what happened because of it." She gestured to the room full of their family. "All of this exists because I was brave enough to say yes, because you were kind enough to offer, because we were both willing to try again after loss." "The widow was raising her daughter alone," Yates quoted softly, his words echoing what he had said to her so many years ago. "And the rancher said she needs a father and you need a partner." Grace smiled up at him, and he was right, about everything. Not everything. "I thought we would have a comfortable partnership. I never imagined I would fall so completely in love." "Neither did I," Grace admitted. "But that is the beautiful surprise of life, is it not? You think you know what you need, but sometimes God has better plans." They rejoined their family, surrounded by the evidence of their love and partnership. The children and grandchildren who carried their blood and their legacy. The ranch that would endure for generations. The love that had grown from desperate necessity into something deep and true and unshakable. As the celebration continued around them, Grace caught Emma's eye across the room. Her daughter, now a woman in her late 40s with children and grandchildren of her own, smiled at her. And in that smile, Grace saw everything. Gratitude for the father Yates had been to her. Love for the family they had created. Understanding of the choices Grace had made all those years ago. Late that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Grace and Yates sat in their customary spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was cool and sweet. 40 years, Grace mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I would do it all again, Yates said. Every moment, every challenge, all of it, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made the good parts sweeter. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. I love you, Grace. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you for however many years we have left. I love you too, Grace said. Thank you for seeing me all those years ago. For seeing that I needed help and having the courage to offer it. Thank you for being patient with my grief. Thank you for loving Emma as your own. Thank you for building this life with me. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the midst of loss and built something beautiful together. Two people who had proven that love could come more than once, that hearts could heal, that families could be built from the ruins of tragedy. The widow had needed a partner. The rancher had needed a family. And together, they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love and courage and the beautiful, transformative power of saying yes when life offered a second chance. As Grace drifted off to sleep that night, held safe in Yates's arms as she had been for 40 years, she thought about all the gifts life had given her. Thomas, her first love, who had given her Emma and taught her about young love and dreams. Yates, her second love, who had given her safety and partnership and a love that deepened with every passing year. Emma, who had grown from a frightened child into a strong woman. Thomas and Jack, the sons born of her second chance at life. And all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward their love. She had been a desperate widow raising her daughter alone. He had been a lonely rancher with an empty house. Together, they had become something neither could have been alone. They had become partners, lovers, friends, and family. And that, Grace thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Not just survival, but life. Not just endurance, but joy. Not just existence, but love. The years continued, and eventually, as all lives must, theirs came to an end. But the love they had built, the family they had created, the legacy they had left, that endured. Their great-grandchildren would one day sit on that same porch and watch the sunset over the Triple Bar Ranch. And they would tell the story of how their great-grandmother, a widow, alone and desperate, had been brave enough to accept help from a kind rancher. How that rancher had been wise enough to see that she needed a father for her daughter and a partner for herself. And how that simple offer had blossomed into one of the great love stories of their family history, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the land or the cattle or the money. Not the hardships overcome or the challenges faced, but the love, the choosing each other every day, the building of a family and a life and a future together. Grace had learned that love was not a finite resource to be used up and never found again. Love was infinite, renewable, capable of growing and changing and deepening over time. She had loved Thomas truly, and she had loved Yates truly, and both loves were real and valid and beautiful in their own ways. And because she had been brave enough to love again, because Yates had been kind enough to offer her a chance, an entire family had been born. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would never have existed if she had stayed in that cabin, paralyzed by grief and fear. The rancher had been right. Emma had needed a father and Grace had needed a partner. But more than that, they had all needed each other. They had needed to become a family, to build something together that was greater than any of them alone, and they had. Through courage and kindness, through patience and persistence, through love and partnership and the daily choice to stand by each other, they had built a life that was rich and full and beautiful. That was the legacy that would endure. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but the knowledge that love could come again after loss. That courage could triumph over fear. That second chances were possible, and they could be just as beautiful, just as meaningful as first ones. The widow and the rancher had found each other in the wild New Mexico territory in 1878, two broken people trying to survive in an unforgiving land. And they had done more than survive. They had thrived. They had loved. They had created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. And when their story was told, as it would be for years to come, it would not be a story of charity or desperation. It would be a story of love. Of the rancher who saw a woman in need and offered help, not because he pitied her, but because he recognized a partner when he saw one. Of the widow who was brave enough to accept that help and open her heart to love again. Of the family they built together, founded on respect and partnership and deep, abiding love. It would be a story of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest times, even when all seems lost, love can find a way. Second chances are possible. And sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another, even better one. That was the true legacy of Grace and Yates Bennett. Not the land or the wealth, but the love. The enduring, transformative, healing power of love. And it all began with a simple offer on a desperate day when a rancher said to a widow, "She needs a father and you need a partner." He was right. They did need each other. And together, they created something beautiful that would last forever.